We're just so happy to see you here. My name is Shay Wesley Martin. My pronouns are they, them, and I am a graduate research associate here in the QualLab, a research center that is focusing on advancing qualitative inquiry toward innovation, equity, diversity, and justice at The Ohio State College of Education and Human Ecology. Joining us today is Dr. Wilson Okello from Pennsylvania State University, who will soon be giving a presentation on the question of Blackness in qualitative inquiry. And so we're so excited to have him with us today. If you are online, feel free to join the conversation, share your takeaways, insights, and connection using the hashtag QualLab Lunch. All right, let us get started. So before we jump in, we do want to acknowledge that Central Ohio, as the traditional homeland of the Shawnee, Potawatomi, Delaware, Miami, Peoria, Seneca, Wyandot, and Ojibwe, and other indigenous nations who have strong ties to these lands. Today, individuals from a broad range of indigenous backgrounds call Columbus and Central Ohio home. We also know that there is a long history of violent and harmful research on indigenous communities, which necessitates acknowledgement and repair. In our work, the QualLab is dedicated to amplifying, supporting, and engaging both with indigenous scholars and also scholars who ethically partner with indigenous communities. Though we are gathering virtually, we encourage all those who are attending or watching this QualLab Lunch to spend time learning about the land on which you exist and the indigenous peoples from whom it was taken. And so our agenda today is pretty simple. We'll first have some words of welcome from our wonderful director of the QualLab, Dr. Penny Pasque. I'll go over some housekeeping and introduce our guest speaker. Then we will have the wonderful Dr. Okello give his talk. We'll have Q&A, and then we'll kind of just share some ways that you can get involved with the work that we're doing in the QualLab.
Thank you so much, Shay, and thank everyone for being here. I'm so excited to welcome you to the first QualLab Lunch of the season. And as you may know, QualLab is a research methodology center in the College of Education and Human Ecology here at Ohio State University. And I founded it in 2020 with the support of Dean Don Pope Davis and Associate Dean Natasha Slesnik in the Office of Research, Innovation, and Collaboration. In just 3 years, it's grown exponentially because of the efforts of the grad research associates who are here today, as well as the GRAs who have worked with us in the past and come before, and to all the presenters who have said yes to us, the participants, you all who engage with us, our faculty fellows, and just the sheer need for a community like this one. So thank you to everyone who has put in labor into our event, and in particular for today's event to Shay Martin, who you've already met. Thank you so much for being here. This year's group of GRAs that is on your screen right now, and we have one undergraduate with us. It's an extremely thoughtful and caring group. And I really look forward to you getting to know them this year through our different events and the information we have online. As you might have noticed, we're a small group of just part-time people, and we do our best to provide any information that we have come across that might be useful onto our dashboard of resources. So it's online. We put it there to make it accessible to everyone else as much as we can, and it also links to resources at Ohio State, as well as links to resources out there and across the globe that you all have provided, these amazing websites that already have that information, and we don't need to repeat it at all, just link and provide a dashboard of support for you all. For the EHE faculty and students, we offer consultations on research grants, on research papers, dissertations, anything except coursework. And we're starting our open office hours this Tuesday in person and virtual, again, for EHE people, again, because we're a small group. So with that, thank you for being here, and I'll pass it back to Shay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pasquet, for that. Just some housekeeping things to make this run a little bit smoothly. Please turn off your microphone during the presentation, but feel free to share any questions or comments during or using the chat space. Dr. Okello will address your questions during our Q&A session. During that time, you can also turn on your microphone and raise a question directly toward him. This session is being recorded, and you will be able to access the recording on our YouTube channel about a week after the session. Closed captioning is also provided during the session, and you can enable the function at the bottom right corner of your video box. And so now I have the honor and pleasure of welcoming Dr. Okello. So Wilson Okello is a PhD, is a transdisciplinary artist scholar who draws on theories of Blackness and Black feminism to think about how knowledge production and human development work together. Most immediately, he is concerned with how Blackness makes visible the epistemic foundations that structure what it means to be human, and imagining otherwise possibilities for Black being therein. His work is published in venues such as the Journal of College Student Development, Race, Ethnicity, and Education, and the Journal of Diversity in Higher Education. Among his national recognitions, he received the Association for the Study of Higher Education's Mildred Garcia Award for Exemplary Scholarship, and he was named an American College Personnel Association Emerging Scholar. Currently, he is an assistant professor of higher education at Penn State University. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. Dr. Okello, the floor is yours.
We are pursuing an investigation here on the subject of crying as an expression of the emotions, and should like to know very much about its peculiarities among colored people. We have been referred to you as a person competent to give us information on the subject. We desire especially to know about the following salient aspect: does the Negro shed tears? Reply: he do, she do. They live, they love, they try, they tire, they flee, they flight, they bleed, they break, they moan, they mourn, they weep, they die, they do, they do, they do. That's from Lucille Clifton, 1991. Greetings, everyone. It's so wonderful to be with you. My name is Dr. Wilson Okello. I am because we are, and because we are, therefore I am. I am a son, a brother, a friend, a partner, a father to a curious, joy-filled, gifted, and everything good 2-year-old named August. So happy to be here with you all. You all made me look good. It says associate professor. I'm an assistant professor currently, but I'll speak that. I'll own that as on the way. I come to you from my home in State College, Pennsylvania. Penn State is located on the homelands of the Erie, Haudenosaunee, the Shawnee, the Susquehannock, and the Wazazi nations. As a land-grant institution, I acknowledge and honor the traditional caretakers of these lands, and I strive to understand and model their responsible stewardship. I also must acknowledge the long history of these lands and our place in that history. In an effort to continually consider place and space, I also want to recognize institutions of higher education as multi-generational sites of violence and dispossession, whereas African descendant people were subject to the violence of forced labor that continues to shape the social and political life for many. For me, grappling with time, with space, with history, the work of memory is part and parcel of how we ought to think about and contextualize our work. And so I do want to, again, say thank you to Dr. Pasquet, to Shay Martin, to me and the QualLab at The Ohio State University, the College of Education and Human Ecology for this beautiful introduction and opportunity. I started with Lucille Clifton because Clifton was responding to an anti-Black line of questioning that refused Black emotionality. I read in Clifton's script a declaration. Declarative statements, claims about what is and can be are fraught with tension in what constitutes good and sound research, thinking, and speaking protocols in academia. The good professor, indeed the good researcher, speaks with a tempered objectivity that is informed by rigorous observation, extended analysis, traceable findings, characteristics that are beholden to Western humanism. To do otherwise has consequences. And yet, Clifton makes Black life undeniable. My interest is in Clifton's compulsion of and to the fullness of being against disciplining structures of society that render Black people as non-human. But before we get there, I want to grapple with the heart of the question that led to Clifton's response. Alvin Borquest was a graduate student writing in particular to W.E.B. Du Bois and sought out his particular expertise, again, leading with this question: does the Negro shed tears? And if so, under what general conditions? This sort of question may seem inflammatory, right? It may seem egregious and as reflective of someone who is not deeply committed to the literature, but I submit to you that the spirit of that question lingers in our contemporary inquiry and protocols, perhaps not explicitly, but in the absence of specificity, I believe this type of inquiry is made plain. And so I want to introduce Sylvia Wynter. In her 1994 exposition, No Humans Involved, an open letter to my colleagues, Wynter incisively critiques disciplinary foundations for how they create, reproduce, and legitimate social hierarchies that make for and allow the range of violences that beget questions about Black mattering. I'll read a portion for your hearing. She writes, "Dear colleagues, you may have heard a radio news report which aired briefly during the days after the jury's acquittal of the policemen in the Rodney King beating case. The report stated that public officials of the judicial system of Los Angeles routinely use the acronym NHI to refer to any case involving a breach of the rights of young Black folks in certain areas of the city. NHI means no humans involved. Stephen Jay Gould argues that systems of classification direct our thinking and order our behaviors. By classifying this category as NHI, these public officials would have given the police of LA the green light to deal with its members in any way that they pleased. You may remember too that in the earlier case of the numerous deaths of young Black folks caused by a specific chokehold used by LA police officers to arrest young Black folks, the police chief, Daryl Gates, explained away these judicial murders by arguing that Black folks had something abnormal with their windpipes," end quote. In this letter, Sylvia Wynter poses two critical questions which compel a consideration of the very logic that structures the problem of Black mattering. In reflecting on the LA public officials' use of the acronym NHI in reference to incidents that involve those who are usually pushed out of education and other systems, she first asks what logic compels the officials to perceive of and thus behave toward young Black people in this way as lack of human. In other words, how did they come to conceive of what it means to be both human as white, Euro-American culture and descent, middle class, college educated, suburban, and the conceptual other to the true human being? I want to suggest that the logic that compelled these LA officials, the public and really higher education, and for the purposes of our conversation, methodology and methods, is this logic of anti-Blackness. Now, historically, anti-Blackness symbolizes racial otherness and subordination, a system bound to descent, national origin, that ultimately became a justification for what we understand as slavery. Conceptualizations of property formed and took on new meaning that would disregard Black intellect and knowledge as illegible in the white imagination. The term anti-Blackness is shorthand for epistemic, ideological, material, spiritual violences against Black people. This harm is contoured, right, by a hyperclimactic obsession with the disregard for Blackness as bonded to Black bodies. Now, again, for the purposes of our conversation, methodology and methods perform a particular type of capture and authentication and are governed by explicit and implicit rules. The rules, insofar as they do not attend to anti-Black conditions, are oriented around and regulated by logics of anti-Blackness, undergirding material and metaphorical violence in research. NHI, thus, should be understood as a manifestation of anti-Blackness. The essence, again, of anti-Blackness in education is the need to contain and discipline Black bodies, Black knowledge, Black desires, right? And so my point of departure, now I should say that in offering this particular reading of Blackness, I'm offering you but one entry point, particularly around anti-Blackness. My point of departure, however, with regard to Blackness, is epistemological in nature, right? The too often assumption, as I understand it, is that censoring Blackness is synonymous with the study of Black people, cultures, history, politics, and experiences. This assumes that Black study is merely descriptive and does not offer critical insight on the racial and the cultural politics of our symbolic and material worlds. Any engagement with Blackness, I believe, must grapple with its formation as a political, as a cultural, as a social, as an economic rule of life, and not the exception. As a social, political, and economic matrix that literally orders knowledge, Blackness is a treatise on and for exclusion. Black people, as its inhabitants, are thus consigned to that which is non-human, incapable of the characteristics that would otherwise define humanity. In this way, Black people exist outside of what Winter has discussed as this man as human, where the man is imagined and reproduced as this singular and universal representation of proper personhood, right? Now, this process by which Black people are constructed as non-human, I think, exists beyond the biological and cultural, right? More fully, again, it exists as this amalgamation of the social political relations that literally disciplines humanity into full humans, not quite humans, and no humans at all, right? Blackness, I believe, designates a changing system of unequal power structures that apportions and delimits which humans can lay claim to full human status and those who cannot. A deeper meditation on Blackness means that we understand it as the set and seat of political relations, and with it, histories of violence, exclusion, enslavement, lynching, segregation, but joy, waywardness, possibility. Toward this principal question, what does it mean to be human? The question of Blackness, the thrust of Blackness as it relates to inquiry, is an epistemic grappling with that central question, what it means to be human. And that, as I tell my students, demands specificity. Now, here's where it gets personal. The first question, as I mentioned, Winter posed, was what is the undergirding logic? We've identified that as anti-Blackness, and more pointedly, Blackness as the sort of epistemic departure. The second question she asks is, what is our responsibility for putting in place that classifying logic? What is our responsibility for the shared mode of subjective understanding in whose inner eyes young Black people can be perceived as being justly shut out of the universe of moral obligation? Winter argues that it's academia, my friends. It was the teachers, it's the researchers who are part of the issues, because those Los Angeles officials were trained in our institutions, right? We, the teachers and the researchers, are responsible for the horrific events and the aftermath, which forever changed the landscape of Los Angeles, because academic institutions uphold and disseminate problematic constructs of race, gender, class, sexuality, other categories that continue to overdetermine Black living and justify or deny humanity. The corpus of Winter's work and many others is calling on us to think more expansively, right? To offer a more expansive rendering of Blackness that at once critiques Western societies, can take up this question of what it means to be human, and call attention to how society prioritizes particular types of being, particularly the man as human as fundamental to this order of knowledge. So again, for inquiry, fundamentally, Blackness unsettles both what can be known and how, or the process of inquiry. I think Christina Sharp is right when she says that to produce legible work in the academy often means adhering to research methods that are drafted in the service of a larger destructive force, thereby doing violence to our own capacities to read, to think, and to imagine otherwise. Despite knowing otherwise, we're often disciplined into thinking through and along lines that reinscribe our own annihilation, reinforcing and reproducing our narratively condemned status. What I appreciate and what I learned from Black studies are the ways that radical theory making takes place outside of existing systems of knowledge. Again, I'm pointing to an epistemic departure, right? So outside of existing systems of knowledge, and that place outside of is inhabited by those who are brilliantly and intimately aware of these knowledge systems, and those sites are places of theoretical insight, right? Sites where individuals are imagining other versions of being, other projections of humanity, other ways of feeling in this world. I'm suggesting that we need a different attunement. And that attunement, I think, must be preceded by an epistemic break. I love what Catherine McKittrick says, that in sitting with artists and writers, particularly June Jordan's radiance and brilliance, she says, I sat with folks like June Jordan, not to discount anti-Black imaginaries and onto-epistemologies, but to ask questions about how Black worlds are not always wholly defined by scientific racism, biological determinism. Studying Black epistemologies for me has allowed me to work out and where and how Black thinkers imagine and practice liberation as they are confronted and weighed down and by systems of knowledge that are fueled by colonial logic. And so my intellectual task, and I think this intellectual task would be for all those who are serious about taking up Black studies, and its relationship to inquiry in particular, are to work imperfectly, to draw attention to how seeking liberation and reinventing the terms of Black life outside the normative conceptions of Blackness is onerous and hard and joyful and difficult, yet measured and unmeasurable. To move toward Black specificity is to recognize the ways that Black people have always been methodologists, and to locate Black living in here, this afterlife of slavery, as a site of method making. I'll say that again. To move toward Black specificity is to recognize the ways that Black people have always been methodologists, and to locate Black living in the afterlife of slavery as a site of method making. Take, for example, Harriet Jacobs. If you consider Harriet Jacobs in the garret, the crawl space that Jacobs dwelled in for 7 years, it was a dark hole. It was an attic space. Amid enclosure, escaping racialized, gendered, sexual violence, she reinvents enclosure as a loophole of retreat. And in doing so, she plots, she plans, she dreams of possibility from within impossible strictures of enclosure and confinement. Therein, my friends, is method making, Black methodology, not the what, but the how. It's not the what of the clearing in Beloved. It's not the plantation, so to speak. It's not the what of marriage, but it's the activity that happens in the clearing. It's the activity of flight in marriage, the desire and process of disobedience. If we search and listen for axiology and desire in the shout, in the dance, in the break, in the love, in the mourn, there, I submit to you, is a particular type of method making. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy, method making. I'm suggesting to you that we need a different attunement. Again, how do we notice otherwise the wayward, the erratic, the beautiful experiment? How do we see in excess of what is captured by social science protocols? Saidiya Hartman will often talk about social scientists as always taking pictures, for example, of the same stuff, is what she says. And so our work, if we are to attune to the breadth and expansiveness of Blackness as it relates to inquiry, is to think in excess of what's captured in the normative frame. What are the methods for imagining new ways of thinking, of feeling, of doing in the wake of ongoing subjection? For Winter, an epistemic break could be located in the Black art and Black aesthetics movement. For Winter, there was something really different about the 60s and 70s moment because of the emergence and coalescence of several anti-colonial, anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-poverty struggles, among others. They were upsetting the foundation of Western and westernized societies around the world. Despite their varied trajectories, they were all compelled for their own well-being to interrogate the many projects of domination. The Black art and aesthetics movement, as we might understand it, are ways of imagining processes, responses to the quotidian and everyday conditions of capture and terror that structure Black life. Black artists, writers, thinkers, creatives, they help to mark the coordinates, right, against quotidian acts of terror that animate the lives of Black people. This movement, as I understand it, was a call to consider Black flesh, Black optics, ways of producing embodied, affective, enfleshed work. Right? And so thinking with the Black arts and aesthetics movement in that particular writing, in that particular way of being during this time, I think we might locate an epistemic departure, ways again of thinking outside of normative regime, connected to Black aesthetics and Black art. In a way, it's an idea that I believe will also move us closer to Black methodology, Black method making, and that's this idea of Black study. As we think of the process of Black method making, I think we should avail ourselves to the work, if you will, of Black study. Black study is not confined by Western norms or Enlightenment rationalities. Instead, it revolves around this affirmation of organizing around Blackness as a broad, expansive concept. Black study disrupts established knowledge systems. It challenges our restrictive regimes and encourages a reevaluation of how knowledge is created and shared in society. Black study is a means of destabilizing epistemological protocols. It explores alternative, otherwise possibilities for knowledge production and dissemination. Unlike traditional forms of study and engagement, Black study is not about seeking certainty or conclusions. Black study resists the discipline that I believe we're oftentimes socialized into around methods and methodology. It embraces ongoing exploration, adaptation, and engagement with ideas. Black study involves a particular type of commitment to care and restoring Black narratives and experiences in the face of violence and degradation. This tarrying is something that I want to offer us as we think about the work of Black study. What does it mean to just be and dwell with, to approach rigorously, right, an examination that situates Blackness and the Black condition, emphasizing dynamic engagement with concepts, right? So Black study. To work with Black aesthetics and to work with Black study, I believe moves us towards something that we might call Black methodology. Black methodology, I think, is an approach that demands a particular type of openness, is unsatisfied with questions that result in descriptive, data-induced answers. Description, I want to offer you, is not liberation. Description is not liberation. Black methodological practice is when we read, we live, we hear, we groove, we create and write across a range of temporalities, places, texts, and ideas that build on existing liberatory practices and carves out ways of living in the world that are provisionary, that are practical, that are imprecise, and still being worked out. I think this notion of Black methodology is a way-making type of project that is always unfinished. I think we might understand Black methodology, again, if we are to work with notions like the Black aesthetics and Black arts movement, to think with those writers, those thinkers, those creatives who are laying a particular groundwork for what it means to be human. It introduced that period, introduced a particular way of thinking about method making as an ongoing and evolving process. Black methodology, I think, offers us ways of thinking beyond analytics, right? It's analytically maneuvering that characterizes Black life and living as a method-making endeavor, right? This perspective, I believe, it sheds light on the dynamic process of Black life and livingness. So how might we locate opportunities to think about method by the ways that Black people live, right? Instead of attempting to sort of constrain it to an analytic. I think Black methodology is a way of challenging established, again, systems of knowledge. It's a way of reevaluating the essence of humanity by placing inquiry at its core, or the process, again, of inquiry. I think it's curiosity-driven. Thrives on curiosity rather than adhering, again, to rigid techniques. It aims for exploratory approaches that yield unexpected insights, provisional insights and outcomes. I think it's a type of methodology that embodies the qualities of defiance and nonconformity and rebellion, as we might understand it in the Black tradition, as a activity of getting free, as an activity of flight, distinctly rooted, again, in Black experience and perspective. I think honoring Black study through methodology is to think intertextually, it's to think interdisciplinarily, it's to think multidisciplinarily. It's to work across, to think about what it means to engage with one another. It's a practice of deep engagement. And if something materializes from it, great, but that's not the goal, right? What does it mean to sit with and to continually work out our freedom project? They provide an intellectual framework for understanding, I think, the intricacies of Black life. And then, again, a Black methodology, or Black methodology broadly, might think about, again, moving beyond this notion of data authentication or authenticating data. Black life or Black living cannot be reduced to conventional data points, right? It can't be reduced to conventional data points. I think to pursue something like Black methodology, or an idea of Black methodology, is to think about transcending notions of truth, right? Offering a different way of sitting with Black people's experiences for what they have to say, what they offer, what they can teach us. And so, again, provisional ideas around notions of Black methodology. In order to do this type of work, I believe we need to get somewhat move away from notions of theory to practice, which again, I think butts against some of the ways that we are trained and socialized, and really move into notions of developing a theoretical practice, which is to say, how are you practicing the very theory that you are espousing? Right. I think meaningfully accounting for Blackness in qualitative inquiry is to participate, again, in a notion of study. I think if Black methodology is not a particular type of legible methodology, it's doesn't follow a particular methodological process per se, but the practice, it's a practice of recognizing Black life and living. I think to sit with the question of Blackness is to commit ourselves to a revised, again, theoretical practice. Black methodology is not about making, reproducing, or creating analytics. Rather, it is an act of sharing ideas about where liberation is and or might be. Black people, again, have always used interdisciplinary methodologies to explain, explore, and story the world, because thinking, writing, imagining across a range of text disciplines, histories, and genres unsettles the particular types of racial logics that have been framed to distort Black ways of knowing and being in the world. Bringing together these various sources and texts, again, not to capture something or someone, but to question the analytical work of capturing and the desire to capture something or someone, again, I think is a particular type of refusal that Black methodology takes up. And so as we think about what a theoretical practice could look like, I want us to commit ourselves to reading, to sharing, and to citing. Citational practices, right, and deep reading at the core of Black method making is this notion of deep reading, right? It involves a thorough and immersive engagement with text, allowing for a nuanced understanding of the ideas and perspectives that are being cited. I'm moving toward just citing individuals or citing people or ideas and moving toward a particular type of meaningful citation, right? I think Ida B. Wells is a really important example of this. I think she exemplifies the significance of deep reading and sharing. Her meticulous examination of sources, for example, a willingness to disseminate that knowledge played a crucial role in shaping, I think, the Black intellectual tradition. I think our theoretical practice ought to think about deep reading as a powerful tool for subverting existing knowledge systems. It enables thinkers, Black thinkers in particular, to unearth voices that would not otherwise come to the fore, right? And to share them with a wider audience, offering, I think, alternative ways of understanding the world. This notion of sharing and deep reading speaks to the transmission of Black ways of knowing. Deep reading and sharing extends beyond surface level engagement. They encompass a commitment to understanding and affirming Black ways of knowing, whether through written, verbal, nonverbal, whether they're sung, whether it's whispered, whether it's remembered or dreamed, forms of communication. It's this transmission of Black ways of knowing that becomes vital for beyond any publication, but toward notions of how do we be? What does it mean to be in the afterlife of slavery and into the future? I think this notion of deep read or theoretical practice that is connected to reading, to sharing, and citing is ongoing, right? It encourages continual dialogue, reflection, theorizing to refine and expand method making, ensuring that it remains dynamic and to responsive. Deep reading ensures the integrity, I think, of citational practices. It signifies a commitment to accurately representing and acknowledging sources that have profoundly shaped and continue to shape Black intellectual thought. Now, this is not to suggest that you need to agree with everything that you cite or even like the things that you're citing. What I'm motioning toward is a particular type of ethical engagement that legitimates, one, that Black ideas are important, but then two, how do we put those ideas in conversation with one another as all perhaps contributing to the larger project of liberation? And so that was quite a bit in a short amount of time. But I want to honor the time we have for questions, and I'll pause there and open it up.
Before we jump into questions, I just want to thank you so much for such brilliance, genius, and truth. I felt like I was in church, Dr. Okello. Like I needed to amen all of the things. Needed my church fan, my church hat on. But I just appreciate you so much. And so much goodness, so much truth in that. I know that folks have questions, have affirmations, have thoughts as well. And so if you have a question, feel free to either type it in the chat or, right, in the spirit of Black church, Blackness, you can unmute yourself and just shout it out. And Dr. Okello will engage. So feel free to do so. And yeah.
Hey, thank you so much. And I'm going to jump in on the spirit of Black church, as you mentioned. Dr. Okello, I cannot thank you enough for your work and that experience, because that presentation was an experience. So I've been in my studies, I'm a PhD student here in the Department of Teaching and Learning, and I focus on literacies, especially the literacies of Black youth and Black families, actually. Mm-hmm. So I've been thinking of Black aesthetics as method making for some time, and I'm coming from a discipline where the emphasis on methodology is to is to describe the material, right? And I really appreciated earlier how you mentioned how it's more than description, isn't it? So the poetic then, the aesthetic, the Black aesthetics as the poetic. I see that it offers a way to ground the Black subject to the material world. And I guess I struggle sometimes with the tension of having to describe the material, right? It's difficult to this process then of having to ground the poetic to the material form. I find that challenging sometimes, especially in my discipline, and showing that in my work. What advice would you have for me then as a young PhD student? Yeah, thank you.
No, thank you for that, your engagement and that really, I think, important question. For me, it's thinking about the priority of the poetic, right? And how do we hold on to it in and beyond what academia allows for, which is to say that if there isn't space for it to show up in a particular program and or writing, thinking about the dissertation project in particular, what does it mean for the poetic to be beyond or get beyond this sort of fixity of the academy, right? How might we understand its usefulness as perhaps something that is for you and the communities with which you engage? How might you be able to sort of take that up and deploy it in space, in alternative spaces? I'm saying alternative, but I think there's a better word for it. But in spaces, again, beyond the university site. I don't know that the university is ever or will ever be able to ethically handle the poetic. I think it is already rooted in anti-Black ways of knowing and being. I don't know that we should look to it as a place to hold the type of freedom, dreaming, and method making that I think you are calling our attention to. And so what does it look like, one, to engage with it outside of the academy, right? Perhaps there's a study group, right? Perhaps it's the community engagement. Perhaps there's ways of taking your work and making it meaningful for communities that actually care for it and its process, right? And then there are also ways, perhaps, of writing pieces of it partially into your academic work, right? And so if I understand that the dissertation project, for example, will never be able to hold all of this, how am I already thinking about the excess, right? How am I thinking about the benefit of this work in excess of what is going to be signed off on for a dissertation project? That's the initial thought that's coming to my mind.
Thank you.
Thank you. Gabrielle?
We also have a question from Kat Stevens-Peace that says, thank you, Dr. Okello. How does one begin to navigate the vastness of Black studies and numerous schools with of thought within it while incorporating it into higher education research?
Yeah, I think thank you, Dr. Stevens, for that question. So I emphasize the idea of study last because I believe that that becomes the fulcrum or the place, pivot, or the place where we might be able to begin thinking about its relationship. I'm not beginning with sort of Black study as situated within the university. I think that must operate in excess of the university. And then our work is to think about what it looks like in relation to push on method and to push on our various disciplines. But the study that you're talking about, Dr. Stevens' piece, is, I think, engagement with scholars, with community, with Black girls and Black boys, right? It's figuring out what these ideas mean for us, and then perhaps it's figuring out how we then begin to draw that up as a theoretical framing, right? It's beginning, then, how might we take this up as a conceptual frame in our work? But I think that work begins in excess of the university. So find some folks and read. And that's, I think we need to find people who we can read with and read honestly with and push each other and grapple and sit with a text, for longer than what syllabi may call for, right? And so if we're, I don't know, I mentioned Ida B. Wells, for example. How might we take up Southern Horrors or Red Record and just, let's grapple with this, let's unpack it, let's move across the data she was calling on to, but let's go back and look at the lives of the people that inspired her work, the friends that inspired her work. I mean, so there's a way of deep reading that I think we often get away from in the academy, and I don't know that the academy, again, can make room for that type of work. And so when I'm talking about study, I'm talking about an emphasis on engaging Black studies, but Black study as the vehicle toward that. And then I think it's the plotting and the planning for how this might look like in our work in academia. Thank you. Thank you for that important question.
I'll ask my question next. Thank you so much, Dr. Okello. I think the question that's coming up for me right now is thinking about this balance between like illegibility and making what can be made plain through this engagement with Black study. So I'm wondering kind of like how one like maintains a degree of illegibility to their like Black methodological work, I guess, would be my question.
Can you say that one more time?
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking about what it means to hold like, certain forms of knowledge sacred, or for other forms of knowledge that are legible to Black folks, but perhaps illegible to non-Black folks. What does it look like to actualize that and balance that within a Black methodological framework?
Thank you, Gabrielle, for that. I think that's a really important question. I love the framing that Dr. Gregory Carr offers in thinking about what I hear in that question as a conversation between, as a conversation among Black people first, right? So he talks about this notion of the governance formation. And the government is distinct from the social structure. So in the social structure, there are ways of understanding Black people. There are ways of explaining Black people to society, but the governance formation is different. The governance formation asks the question of who are Black people to each other. And that, again, it gets away from this attempt that I need to be legible to the social structure. I'm not interested in the social structure. I'm interested in what ideas, what ways of being, what ways of living, our values, what they mean for each other. And I think we work that out in governance formations, right? I think your communities will tell you what to hold on to if you listen for it, right? Because oftentimes, there's a way of hearing something, and then there's a way of hearing it, right? So if somebody is telling you, it doesn't always have to be verbal and explicit. Sometimes it's a nonverbal, like, don't say that. Like, but like, you know what I mean? And so like, how might we get into a governance formation with some ideas as a way of discerning how they ought to move first amongst Black communities, but then, what ought to be shared with the social structure. Everything isn't it for everybody. And I think if we are to take Black studies seriously, I think it means grappling with the ideas that the idea or the notion that some ideas are for us. So and so yes, so that's one or maybe two. I lost my point, but I'm also thinking about this notion that I think we need to trust that Black communities and people have the ideas beyond what the academy can offer in terms of research and or findings and or money or whatever it is to do a particular type of healing for each other, right? And so I think if we trust that our ideas as legible amongst Black communities are beneficial, then we're not looking for affirmation from the social structure. We're not looking for affirmation from research enterprises or foundations or grants or whatever it is, right? And so the idea of legibility for me becomes a question of how do we sound good to the social structure, and in a governance formation that doesn't matter. And so yeah, that's sort of how I'm making sense of your question. Thank you for that offering.
I have a question, just because I am so struck by this whole notion of the poetic, and more specifically, as it relates to my work, of Black church aesthetics as poetic and method making. This whole notion of tarrying, it took me back to the Pentecostal church of sitting with, tarrying with, waiting on, with a mother who was waiting on the Spirit to come down, right? And I think that just that notion, but also that language is so beautiful and so important when we think about Black study and Black methodology and qualitative research. But also, to someone else's point, this often completely goes against what we are being taught and what we know is Black cultural, Black church traditions to sit with. It's a level of pacing that comes with that. It's not rushed. It's not fast. You can't tarry and do it fast. The academy is so rushed and it's so anti-Black, where it does not open up the space to tarry and to sit with certain things. So kind of talk to me. This is a very selfish question, but kind of talk to me about that, because I know the work and the labor that it takes to do this depth of work that the Black study and Black methods require, but the academy is constantly pushing us to go fast, get there fast. So just kind of talk to me, about what this means and how we can resist just kind of this pacing, the rush.
So thank you for that. That's a that could be the benediction if we wanted to be. But you know, I really appreciate what you're calling us to think about in terms of pace. The language of pace is, I think, really important for me. I've been meditating on this idea of slowness for the past few months, and slowness as a refusal, it's not necessarily a question of doing less or anything like that. I'm understanding slowness, or coming to understand slowness as really a doing more, right? Because it requires so much more of you emotionally. It requires so much more of you affectively. To be present is to notice otherwise, right? So if you're driving in a car and you're passing a pole, if you're going at a particular pace, you can notice the pole, but to move slowly requires a different type of intellectual labor. It requires a different type of emotional labor to take in the texture, to take in not only the color, but perhaps its vibrancy or its aesthetic, how it's formed, this type of cylinder, right? So to tarry, as you're suggesting, to think about pace, Amber, is to do more work, right? And so for me, like the idea is, and I think that's what Black study is, right? It's a doing more by moving at a different type of pace, right? Or to take up an idea of slowness. And so so that's one. And then two, I think I'm still very much trying to figure that out too. So I won't pretend that I've figured out the balance, or if there is even a balance of of what the academy requires and what Black study demands. I can say that I think moving in and with notions of slowness, right, as a deep integrity to Black thought, ways of being and knowing, I think contributes to the longer genealogy of Black thought in a different way. And again, thinking from a governance formation, I think that ought to be the place of mattering for us. How are we in conversation with and extending belonging to this longer genealogy of Black thought? We can do rushed work, but if it's not beneficial to this longer genealogy, then what's it all for? What's it all for, right? And so that's an imperfect, imprecise response, and one that I'm continuing to tarry with. I continue to observe senior scholars and folks in the field who I admire, who are, I think in this call as well, who are also doing, or who have done and are doing this type of very work. And so I think it's what I'm calling us to, perhaps, Amber, is thinking about what this looks like in community. How do we be with one another as we think about what it means to tarry and exist in excess of what the university is requiring of us.
So beautiful. And on that note, amen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Amen. I don't have a question. I just want to say thank you for your authenticity and for always just showing up as who you are and never leaving any piece of yourself behind. I think so often people are trying to do what they think they are supposed to do, but your work is soul work, and it reaches people in ways that not only resonate, like words fail me. And your work continues to inspire me and so many others to do the work that our souls must have. I think it's so important that we don't get lost in what we think we are supposed to be doing, and that we do the work that we are called to do.
Yeah.
So thank you. Thank you, as always,
I appreciate
just pouring into others beyond yourself. I love you and I appreciate you.
I love you too, Dr. Hall. Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
So with that, I'm going to come back on and just once again, thank you so much, Dr. Okello, for this hour of power that you've given us and community and just affirmation and reminders. If you want to engage more with Dr. Okello's work, we'll post a link to his publications in the chat. Contact information is on the screen. I also just want to highlight 2 opportunities for engagement. So the first one is a call for papers for a special collection of for the International Journal of Qualitative Methods. This collection, titled "No Humans Involved on the Potentialities of Black Research Approaches in Education," the call is out. It extends Winter's critique to educational research, positing that the study with and about Black life and existence must intentionally take up Blackness as histories of terror and exclusion, hope, refusal, and possibility toward the principal question: what does it mean to be human? And so this special collection invites scholars to explore the following question: what does it mean to center Blackness in educational research? 3 guest co-editors, including Dr. Okello, Dr. DeMarcus Jenkins, and Dr. Tiffany, I think it's Nia-Che, is that right?
Nia-Che.
Okay, Nia-Che, yeah. So the submission deadline is December 31st. And then the other thing is an invitation to join the Black Study and Education Lab for their first webinar, Black Research Approaches, Collaborative Intellectual Praxis, on Thursday, October 12th from 3:30 to 5:30 p.m. They have 2 featured speakers, Dr. Dominique Hill and Dr. Darrell Collier. And so you can register by clicking or scanning that QR code there. Before we go, a couple more things. Next month, we have another QualLab Lunch with Dr. Jacqueline Mack from Northern Illinois University, talking about the Caesar Scholars Collective, Advancing Critical Feminist Refugee Epistemologies in Qualitative Inquiry. So that is next month, Thursday, October 19th from noon to 1 p.m. You can also watch past recordings of QualLab Lunches on our YouTube channel and register and see what we have coming up on our website. And then lastly, but not least, just thank you all so much. Let me see if this slide will change. Great. So thank you all so much for joining us. Please, please, please stay connected with us for more lunches and events that we have coming up. Visit our website on the screen. Follow us and check us out on Twitter. And then you can always connect with us via email. We would love to hear from you. And yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Okello. Thank you so much to the QualLab team for supporting this. And thank you, all of you who came out, showed up, and showed out on today's QualLab Lunch. Appreciate it. Bye, y'all.